In 1995, Panorama got a scoop its rivals the world over wanted. It changed history.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Now, an independent inquiry for the BBC has found that reporter Martin Bashir used forgeries to get the interview, deceiving both Princess Diana and her brother.
The first statements that I was shown were to get my trust. The second set was to get to Diana.
Martin Bashir spun a web of elaborate lies to win the trust of the princess.
And what makes it more wicked is the degree of detail which Martin Bashir appears to have gone into.
For 25 years, the BBC defended its global scoop, but now stands accused of a failure of integrity.
Everything that they'd said around the time, and since then, I wouldn't call it lies, but half-truths.
Martin Bashir's reputation lies in ruins, described by the inquiry as dishonest and devious.
If somebody seriously endangers the trust that audiences feel they can place in the BBC's journalism, then they shouldn't be working in the BBC.
Tonight, the story behind the Panorama scoop that until now the BBC never wanted you to hear.
I think it's important to understand that when somebody comes to you from BBC's Panorama and presents something to you, first of all, you pay attention.
The story begins with a letter from Panorama reporter Martin Bashir to Earl Spencer in the summer of 1995.
This is the initial approach from Bashir. The very first message I got from Bashir when he wanted to meet me at the end of August was, no interview, he's not after one, he just needs to share some stuff with me.
What Martin Bashir wanted to share, according to Earl Spencer, was evidence that the Earl was being spied on. It got him a meeting at Althorp House.
I was presented with bank statements by Bashir relating to a figure who worked for me here.
But they looked authentic.
They looked very real.
The statements showed payments to Earl Spencer's ex-head of security from Rupert Murdoch's News International and a company Martin Bashir claimed was a front for the intelligence services.
I took the precaution of calling up his executive producer immediately after meeting him because he came with such astonishing facts. And he fully vouched for him. He said, yes, you can believe everything Martin says. He's one of my best.
Assured the Panorama reporter could be trusted, and with the promise of more information, Earl Spencer agreed to another meeting, where he says Martin Bashir produced more bank statements, showing the closest advisors to both Diana and Prince Charles were also secretly being paid to spy on her. It took Bashir one step closer to the princess.
And this was such a major upgrade in what Bashir was telling me that I knew that Diana had to know about it. She wrote me a note, which I still have, saying that it all made sense. And I think that she was looking for a reason as to why things were as they were. I think Diana was already vulnerable by mid-1995. She seemed unsettled. She was aware that things she was saying in great privacy to a very select bunch of people, close family, close friends, advisors, these things were getting out into the newspapers. And it's quite understandable that you would begin to think that people were spying on you.
Earl Spencer invited Martin Bashir to meet his sister at a friend's flat in Knightsbridge. Martin Bashir appears to have come prepared, with stories that would have amplified all of Diana's anxieties and created a few more to boot. Earl Spencer noted down a string of astonishing and lurid claims by Bashir. Journalists, the intelligence services, and courtiers were all conspiring against her, even her most senior advisor, Commander Patrick Jeffson.
I mean, it's entirely made up. And what makes it more wicked, to my mind, is the degree of detail which Martin Bashir appears to have gone into.
One note says, Jeffson - dangerous money left offshore account in March 1994.
Yeah, totally untrue. Totally untrue.
I suppose the really troubling thing there, from your point of view, is the word dangerous.
Well, I suppose from Martin Bashir's perspective, I was the obstacle that had to be removed. So by removing me from a position of trust, it left the way open for him to give her any yarn he wanted to try and ingratiate himself with her.
By the end of the meeting in Knightsbridge, Earl Spencer had decided that Martin Bashir's stories were so fantastical, they just didn't add up.
I had warned Diana very clearly and apologised. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, Carlos," which is what she called me. It was nice to see you and it doesn't matter at all. And I thought that was it. I still take full responsibility for introducing this man to Diana. But at the end of the day, I had done my due diligence. I'm not trying to get off the hook. It's still my responsibility.
But Martin Bashir had got his in with the princess. Numerous secret meetings would follow. Her private secretary, Commander Jeffson, detected a change.
The princess was, I would say, in a heightened state of anxiety. I was aware there was something the matter, and it involved me, and I didn't know what it was, but I hoped that it would make itself known sooner or later.
On the 5th of November 1995, Martin Bashir slipped into Kensington Palace with his film crew disguised as tradesmen. With a straight face, he asked Princess Diana a question he'd spent the previous 7 weeks priming her to answer.
Do you really believe that a campaign was being waged against you?
Yes, I did, absolutely. Yeah.
Why?
I was a separated wife to the Prince of Wales. I was a problem, full stop. Never happened before. What do we do with her?
Can't we pack her off to somewhere quietly rather than campaign against her?
She won't go quietly. That's the problem. I'll fight till the end.
After the interview, relationships with Buckingham Palace became very strained. And so professionally, just speaking as a private secretary, my job, which was already not easy, became, I felt, impossibly difficult.
Patrick Jeffson quit, the fallout from the interview ending his career.
I didn't want to resign. For it to end in this way was devastating. It was a life-changing event.
There's no doubt Princess Diana wanted to tell her story. Martin Bashir had succeeded where rivals had failed. It was one of the BBC's greatest ever scoops.
There is so much material here that we'll be devoting at least 9 pages to it.
She spoke of adultery.
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him.
Mental and physical illness.
You try and hurt yourself on the outside because you want help.
And palace plotting.
There's no better way to dismantle a personality than to isolate it.
A month later, the Queen ordered a divorce. The royal fairy tale was well and truly over. The interview had cut her adrift. We've pieced together the calculated deceit that Martin Bashir deployed to land his scoop. In the summer of 1995, he'd identified Earl Spencer as his gateway to the princess. The Earl had been reeled in thanks to the bank statements. What he didn't know was that they were forgeries.
Late August 1995, I got a phone call on my mobile, and it was Martin Bashir. He asked if he could come round, and he was telling me that it was a very urgent job and that he needed some documents making up.
Did Martin Bashir disclose the purpose of what he was going to use it for, what it was in connection with?
He reluctantly, in the end, he said, well, Well, it's about surveillance. That's all I can say.
Matt Wiesler thought he was making replicas of real documents. But after the interview with the princess aired, Wiesler became worried he'd been duped. He confided in some BBC colleagues.
I found out that Martin Bashir had authorised the preparation of some bank statements. If that was the case, it may have been possible that Martin had used these documents, which were not genuine, either directly or indirectly, to secure the interview with Diana.
Harry Dean phoned the Panorama editor, Steve Hewlett, the executive who'd personally vouched for Martin Bashir to Earl Spencer.
I telephoned Steve and he said, well, come up to the office now. Steve's initial reaction was to say, I don't see why this is any of your business, which set the tone for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. By the end of the meeting, things had calmed, and Steve did thank us for bringing this information to him. But initially it was a rather ill-tempered exchange.
Steve Hewlett assured Harry Dean there was nothing to worry about. Then Hewlett called in the designer, Matt Wiesler.
I told Steve Hewlett exactly what I'd done for Martin. He didn't give me the cold shoulder, but he didn't seem to understand that I had a real concern and that I needed some reassurance. He just thanked me for coming in and said he'd be handling it from there on in. And that was that.
A month after the interview was broadcast, Matt Wiesler returned to the BBC, still anxious that his documents had somehow been used to dupe the princess. This time he told the head of current affairs, Tim Gardam, who realised he'd now have to investigate the BBC's News Star reporter.
Martin Bashir assured Tim Gardam he hadn't shown the documents to Diana or to anyone else. They couldn't have been used to persuade the princess to give the interview, he said, because the princess was the source of the information in them. What had been missed was a big clue that Bashir was lying.
And here's why. Martin Bashir had first made contact with Princess Diana in late September. Yet the bank statements had been created some 3 weeks earlier.
Although BBC management had been made aware of both dates, no one appears to have spotted that Diana couldn't have been Bashir's source, because she and Bashir had yet to meet.
Although Gardam missed this clue, he was still puzzled. Why had Martin Bashir gone to the trouble and expense of creating such authentic-looking documents? So he asked for proof that the princess hadn't been shown them.
The following day, a courier arrived from Kensington Palace with a handwritten note from the princess. It said, and I quote, "I can confirm that I was not shown any documents nor given any information by Martin Bashir that I was not already aware of. I was perfectly happy with the interview and I stand by it."
I've seen the content of the letter. It doesn't exonerate the BBC as far as I'm concerned, because Diana is dealing from a position of having been lied to. She didn't know that the whole obtaining of the interview was based on a series of falsehoods that led to her being vulnerable to this.
Diana's letter put to rest any doubts BBC bosses had that she'd been tricked or coerced. The BBC's greatest ever scoop was safe, for now. Other journalists, however, were closing in on the deception behind the interview. In March 1996, the Mail on Sunday got a tip-off that a Panorama insider might be prepared to talk.
I went down to southwest London, knocked on the door of a narrowboat, and I realised very quickly that there was something here when he started talking about the fabrication of documents.
Nick Fielding had tracked down graphic designer Matt Wiesler.
He was angry. I think that he felt he had not been taken seriously within the BBC when he'd raised these issues. He'd been brushed off effectively.
I remember Nick Fielding saying to me, "I would suggest you make a statement to me as to what your involvement is."
Wiesler said he'd unwittingly made the forgeries for Bashir, but hadn't known what they'd been used for. Nick Fielding eventually worked out Bashir's plan.
Our strongly held belief was that he had prepared these documents in order to curry favour with Spencer, in the hope that Spencer would then use his influence and power in relation to his sister to obtain an interview for Martin Bashir.
The Mail on Sunday were inching closer to the truth. On Thursday, the 21st of March, the BBC learned that the newspaper was planning a story. BBC internal documents reveal management's mounting anxiety about what Bashir had been doing.
Martin Bashir had already told BBC management back in December that he hadn't shown the fake documents to anyone. Over the weekend, BBC bosses questioned him about this again, and again he denied showing the forgeries to anyone, twice, including a specific denial that he'd shown them to Earl Spencer.
On Saturday afternoon, the Mail on Sunday piled on the pressure. The paper laid out what they intended to publish, that Martin Bashir had shown the fakes to Earl Spencer.
Tim Gardam phoned Martin Bashir yet again. Only now did Bashir cave in, admitting that he had, after all, shown the fake documents to Earl Spencer. It had taken 4 attempts to get this admission from Bashir.
Public trust in the BBC's journalism is about the most important thing for the BBC to preserve. If somebody seriously endangers the trust that audiences feel they can place in the BBC's journalism, then they shouldn't be working in the BBC.
It was Richard Eyre's responsibility to draw up the BBC's editorial guidelines, which set the standards and values programme makers had to adhere to.
If a reporter lied to a contributor or someone facilitating an interview, how serious would you have regarded that?
Let me put it like this. The sort of breach of the guidelines which would be involved in deceiving Lord Spencer, because that's what I think you're talking about, would be not only a breach of the guidelines, but in my view, because it was clearly deliberate and calculated, it would be a disciplinary offence within the organisation.
Tim Gardam, the head of current affairs, agreed, concluding that action was needed. He was about to leave the BBC and urged his boss, Tony Hall, to get to the bottom of what Bashir had been up to.
In a handover note, Tim Gardam said he'd agreed with Tony Hall, and I quote, that the BBC needed to find out the entire truth behind Bashir's activities, given he had misled us and appeared to have acted unethically and in breach of the guidelines.
Tony Hall, then managing director of BBC News, took personal charge. He questioned Martin Bashir, but failed to check out much of what he was told.
Martin Bashir claimed to Tony Hall that he'd met members of the intelligence services and close friends of Diana. He even described how one of her oldest friends had shown him a telephone junction box at Kensington Palace where the princess thought her phone was being tapped. We contacted the friend to check out this part of Bashir's story. The friend told us she'd never met Martin Bashir in her life.
Most importantly, Tony Hall had not checked Bashir's account with Earl Spencer, even though the reporter was now claiming that some of the information in the faked bank statements had actually come from the Earl himself, something the Earl categorically denies.
I think it's a great shame that the BBC didn't ask me about this 25 years ago, because we could have got to the bottom of this then.
I guess you could have called them.
I could have spoken to the BBC if I knew there was an investigation. One of the things that hamstrung me, though, was the consideration of my sister's position.
Do you think you'll ever be Queen?
No, I don't. No.
I think even now the Panorama interview that she gave is seen as very controversial. And I didn't want us to be seen to be undermining her in any way.
I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts. But I don't see myself being queen of this country. I don't think many people would want me to be queen. Actually, when I say many people, I mean the establishment that I'm married into, because they've decided that I'm a non-starter.
By April, the Mail on Sunday were now ready to publish their story. Nick Fielding got the front page splash, with the headline posing the question the BBC inquiry had so far failed to answer. Why did Diana's interviewer fake these bank documents?
I think you specifically asked the BBC if Martin Bashir had actually shown these forgeries to Earl Spencer.
We did indeed.
And what was their response to that?
As far as I can understand from their response is that they had never been shown to anybody outside of the production team.
After consulting Tony Hall, the BBC press office issued this statement. The draft graphic reconstructions, they said, were never in any way connected to the Panorama on Princess Diana. This BBC response was misleading. It had the effect of covering up what the Mail on Sunday had suspected all along.
I can tell you that by the time you asked that question, Martin Bashir had admitted showing them to Earl Spencer.
I'm genuinely shocked to hear that. I am genuinely shocked. If they had answered in the affirmative that they had been shown to Earl Spencer at that point, that would have changed the shape of the story quite dramatically. And I think we would have persevered with the story for much longer. I don't think we would have let go of it, to be frank with you.
Instead, the following day, the newspapers were full of stories claiming allegations of forgery were just smears dreamt up by Panorama colleagues jealous of Martin Bashir's scoop. It was a narrative being pushed by the BBC itself.
It seems they had arrived at a conclusion that the only problem was jealous and bitter colleagues on Panorama, rather than pursuing any more information about the documents that Martin had forged. That's how it seemed to me.
The papers dropped the forgery story. The heat was off. Once again, the reputations of the BBC and Martin Bashir had been saved. An internal memo recorded management's relief. The Diana story is probably now dead, unless Spencer talks. Fortunately for the BBC, Spencer wasn't talking. And Tony Hall was wrapping up his investigation into Martin Bashir's activities.
This internal BBC document was prepared as part of Tony Hall's inquiry. It's dated the 22nd of April 1996, and the final page suggests there were serious concerns about Martin Bashir's conduct.
It says management will have to decide what action, if any, to take privately or publicly about Bashir, what to do about his contract, and how long he should stay on Panorama. A week later, any notion he might be sacked had evaporated.
On the 29th of April, Tony Hall reported his findings to the BBC's Board of Management. He told the board that he was, and I quote, certain Martin Bashir had not been trying to mislead or do anything improper.
Tony Hall also prepared a statement for the Board of Governors, at the time the body appointed to regulate the BBC. In it, he described the forgeries as merely graphics, and that Martin Bashir had no explanation for why he'd created them. I believe, wrote Hall, he is, even with his lapse, honest and an honourable man.
The fact that Bashir lied should have been made clear to us, but in my memory, it never was. Constitutionally, we, the governors, deserved at very least to be given an honest report of what was going on.
Sir Richard Eyre was present at the governors' meeting. There's no evidence that Tony Hall told the board what he now knew, that Martin Bashir had shown the forgeries to Earl Spencer and then repeatedly lied to BBC management about it.
We can see now that the false bank statements were, in a sense, the lever that opened the doors to access to Diana. If we had known at the time, there's no question that this would have been ruthlessly investigated, because they were very, very hot on a sense of the propriety of the organisation.
This is a fantastic honour for the whole team at Panorama.
The Princess Diana interview won a string of awards. Martin Bashir's career soared. He continued reporting for Panorama for another 2.5 years, then moved to ITV, where more scoop interviews led to lucrative jobs in America.
There are few privileges in this life more meaningful than being invited into somebody's home.
In 2016, he was rehired by the BBC. Last Friday, he resigned as editor of religion on health grounds. Tony Hall became Director General in 2013, stepping down last year. In the 25 years since his inquiry into Martin Bashir, the BBC has stood by its claim there was no connection between the forged bank statements and the Diana interview.
Well, the connection's direct. It's absolutely direct. The first statements that I was shown, the first fake bank statements, were to get my trust. The second set was to get to Diana, and then to get the interview. So it's a very clear chain from anyone logical's point of view.
That connection is now beyond doubt. An independent inquiry ordered by the BBC and led by former Supreme Court Judge Lord Dyson has now exploded decades of denial. The man Tony Hall praised as honest and honourable is now excoriated by Lord Dyson as dishonest and devious.
He was very good at amplifying people's anxieties. He was very good at making you feel as though he was your friend who was going to save you in a difficult and dangerous world.
Lord Dyson's verdict on the BBC was also damning. He said it had fallen short of its high standards of integrity, criticising it for covering up in its public statements what it knew about how Martin Bashir had got the interview.
As for Tony Hall, the former managing director of News, Lord Dyson's criticism is blistering. He described his investigation into Martin Bashir as, and I quote, woefully ineffective. He said Tony Hall had accepted Martin Bashir's version of events without corroboration when alarm bells should have been ringing. And he criticised Hall for failing to tell the Board of Management that Bashir had lied about showing the forged bank statements to Earl Spencer.
Tony Hall says he accepts that his investigation fell well short of what was required, and he was wrong to give Martin Bashir the benefit of the doubt. He says he was open and transparent with the Board of Management and believes he gave them all the key facts. He also says he's always acted fairly and impartially and with the public interest front and centre. The BBC says it makes a full and unconditional apology. The corporation should have made greater effort to get to the bottom of what happened at the time and been more transparent about what it knew. Martin Bashir says he's sorry for asking for bank statements to be mocked up. It was a stupid thing to do and something he deeply regrets. He absolutely stands by the evidence he gave a quarter of a century ago and more recently to Lord Dyson. He says the bank statements had no bearing on the decision by Princess Diana to take part in the interview.
Why have you decided to give this interview now?
I want to reassure all those people who have loved me and supported me throughout the last 15 years, so I'd never let them down. And that is a priority to me, along with my children.
A quarter of a century after Princess Diana bared her soul to Martin Bashir, those closest to her still associate that interview with a chain of events that ended in her death.
One of the worst consequences of the interview was that it destroyed remaining links with Buckingham Palace. The loss of the royal support structure that had guided and safeguarded her for so many years inevitably made her vulnerable to people who didn't have her best interests at heart or were unable properly to look after her.
Well, the irony is that I met Martin Bashir on the 31st of August, 1995, because exactly 2 years later she died. And I do draw a line between the two events. It's quite clear from the introduction that I sat in on the 19th September 1995, everyone was going to be made untrustworthy. And I think that Diana did lose trust in really key people.
Martin, can we just get one of that tea packet, please?
This is a young girl in her mid-30s who has lived this extraordinarily turbulent and difficult time in the public eye. She didn't know who to trust, and in the end, when she died 2 years later, she was without any form of real protection.
Out. O-U-T, out.